If you thought Apple's greatest invention was the iPhone and that Apple's best days were behind it, you're sadly mistaken, because Tim Cook has got something up his sleeve. If you're an Apple shareholder or you're just big on tech and like to see how other tech companies are doing, I think you're going to be really interested in these numbers, because Apple, even though the iPhones aren't selling as hot right now, they've got something called services that are going to be the greatest wealth generator for them going forward. It's not just me saying that. The CEO of Apple himself, back in 2016, forecasted that by the year 2020, their revenue from services would be doubling. In 2016, services for Apple generated $24.3 billion in revenue. So this means by the year 2020, Apple will be generating $48.6 billion in revenue from services alone. To put that into perspective, iPhone generates about $160 billion for Apple year over year. So $48.6 billion isn't bad, but I think this number is going to be a lot higher, and here's why. In 2018, Apple's revenue for services was $37.2 billion, which means that year over year, services has been growing at 24% for Apple from 2016 to 2018. Since we know services has been growing 24% year over year, we can kind of predict what Apple's going to be making in 2019, and the number I have would be about $46.1 billion. $46 billion is only about $2 billion off of what Apple estimated they'd be making in 2020, which is a whole year after that. If you're wondering what I project Apple's going to be making in 2020, it's going to be about $57.2 billion. I definitely think Apple lowballed this estimate back in 2016 when they said they'd only be doubling their revenue by 2020, because this is a whole $10 billion more than what they projected once they actually hit 2020. $57 billion compared to $48 billion, that's a big difference. And the great thing about Apple services is that it's constant revenue every month, every year. It's constant unless the user, cancels their subscription to a certain service, then it's over. But unlike the iPhone, which is you buy an iPhone every 2 years, or sometimes people skip out and they won't buy iPhones for another 5 years or whatever. Services is constant, iPhones are not. These figures aren't even to mention the services that Apple has yet to unleash. If you're an Apple user, you're familiar with the services such as iCloud, App Store, and Apple Music. Not too long ago, Apple announced that they'd be releasing a new video streaming service, projected to be something like Netflix. And Tim Cook has even said that there's more services coming, which is plural. So there's more than just the video streaming service ahead. And there's a video I saw last night which I thought was pretty crazy, because it's an interview with Jim Cramer. He's interviewing Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, and he's asking him, why don't you guys get into like the credit card business or the health and start pulling money from users that way or whatever. And Tim said that there are more services coming, and he says that in the future, when people are asked what was Apple's greatest contribution to mankind, he says it'll be health. Not iPhone, not iPad, not Macs, health.
Last question, because they're giving me some rap. Healthcare, if you hooked up with different, could you make it so that I can sync? I need to sync, I need to handshake with my doctor, okay? And payments, it can be huge. If you look at a PayPal, they've got a 30 multiple, MasterCard 30. Can you layer either one of those on to be able to jump, even though it's huge, the service stream? Take it so that it's 40% of your company by doing more in payments, more in health.
On services, you will see us announce new services this year. There will be more things coming. I don't want to tell you what they are.
Material.
I believe there'll be material over time.
Okay.
I'm not going to forecast
fair enough.
Precisely the ramps and so forth, but there are things that we feel really great about, that we've been working on for multiple years. On the healthcare in particular, and sort of your well-being, this is an area that I believe, if you zoom out into the future and you look back and you ask the question, what was Apple's greatest contribution to mankind? It will be about health. Because our business has always been about enriching people's lives, and as we've gotten into healthcare more and more, through the watch and through other things that we've created with Research Kit and Care Kit, and putting your medical records on the iPhone. This is a huge deal, and it's something that is very important for people. We are democratizing it. We are taking what has been with the institutions and empowering the individual to manage their health. And we're just at the front end of this. But I do think, looking back in the future, you will answer that question. Apple's most important contribution to mankind has been in health.
Tim Cook, CEO, Apple.
Great
Thank
to
you
see
so
you.
much,
Thank
sir.
you for
Great
having
to see
me.
you.
And I started thinking about this, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe he just means like for the betterment of mankind, that was their biggest contribution. But I don't think so. I've already forgotten who the person was, but there was someone who did an interview, and they said that if they were to bring back one piece of technology to like the 1400s or something, or 1800s, whatever, it would be the iPhone. Because that's what he believes is the greatest contribution of mankind of technology in the 21st century. And I don't think that Tim Cook is just blowing steam when he says that in the future, Apple's greatest contribution to mankind is going to be health. We already see Apple wants people to be more mobile with AirPods and with Apple Watches. The new Apple Watch Series 4 can monitor your heart rate, and it has an EKG monitor or whatever it's called. It's basically the thing that, like, you know, it goes doot-doot, doot-doot. I believe that Apple is eventually going to have a service related to health, whether it's to give you tips on how you can live a healthier life, or it gives you reports based on how your health is doing, or they help you be more active, whatever. I think Apple's going to have a service like that, and I think it's going to be a big deal. I believe Apple sees this as a moat opportunity. No one else is really doing this in the tech community, unless you think of Fitbit or something, but all they do is like track your steps or whatever and give you like a report of how many steps you walked. I think Apple is going to go a step further. Apple has about 6 doctors working for them. Did you know about this? They have roughly, I think, 6 to 4 doctors working with them, and I think they're working with Apple Watch and some sort of health service. I think Apple wants to be your personal doctor wherever you are, wherever you go, all the time. You remember these numbers I shared to you where in 2019 I think Apple's going to be making 46 billion, and in 2020 they're going to be making 57 billion? Let's throw those out the window, because with the introduction of the video streaming service and the potential health service, let's make some numbers to see what Apple will actually be making from services alone in 2020. So I'm going to assume that both these services will launch in 2020, and they're going to start at about $5.99 per month, okay? And they're going to start with about 20 million users each. I think that's fairly conservative, and I like to do conservative numbers just so we don't get our hopes up and we're not underwhelmed later on. So the video service at $5.99 a month with 20 million users on it, monthly revenue for Apple, that's $119.8 million. And every year, that's $1.4 billion for Apple from the video streaming service alone. And let's just duplicate those same numbers for the health service, assuming that Apple will have the same amount of users and they charge the same amount of money per month. So per year, both the video service and the health service for Apple will be about $2.8 billion in revenue in 2019. And let's assume that these grow at a faster rate than the current services are for Apple right now, because more people are, this is something new, the video and the health, so there's more and more people jumping on, so the growth rate is a lot higher. So let's assume that it's about a 40% growth rate year over year. So in 2019, that would mean that these two services alone would be making Apple an extra $2.9 billion in revenue, and by 2020, it's going to be an extra $5.5 billion in revenue. So now if we go back and we actually do these numbers, what Apple services will actually be making Apple in 2019 and 2020 especially, and we factor in these two new services, if these numbers are accurate, I think they're fairly conservative. But let's do the numbers, right? Okay, so in total, in theory, in 2019, Apple will make $50 billion from services alone. In 2020, Apple will be making $62.7 billion from services. To put this into context for you guys, like I said earlier, iPhone contributes about $160 billion for Apple every year. If services can be contributing $60 billion for revenue for Apple every year, that's almost a third of Apple's revenue every single year. Not to mention, it's still growing and it's constant, unlike iPhone. So in conclusion, what do we have here? Analysts are expecting Apple to double their 2016 services revenue by the year 2020, so they'll have about $48.6 billion generated by services in 2020, when in reality, Apple is going to triple that number. Apple is going to bring in $62.7 billion in revenue from services alone, and that's conservative. I wouldn't doubt if they push 65, maybe even 70 billion. We'll see.